Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Dom Robinson and welcome to the May 2020 edition of SM Advanced Forum. As always, we're going to spend the next hour chatting informally and voicing opinions on the latest news, views and topics in and around the streaming technology sector. As always, I'm joined by my usual hosts, Tim Sigmund, Mark Easton, Eric Schumacher, Rasmussen, and we are going to also introduce our two guests in due course. But first and foremost, Tim, are you out there?
I am, and as you can see behind me, I haven't quite completed moving the map now that I've moved from my apartment, but this is probably, essentially what America's doing, trying to isolate itself from everybody, even if we don't tend to distance ourselves from each other. Just think of us as a giant island, so to speak. Anyway,
I'm making comments about nothing being politically right of America, but anyway, never mind.
Of course. So, speaking of that, how are things in lockdown on your end of the Atlantic?
I'm enjoying it. We're still safely locked down. The wife's unfortunately having to go into work at the primary school to look after about 6 key workers, but they're distanced by about the distance of a classroom and fully masked and so on. So that's cool. I think the only crunch point will come for me is as and when the state decides that we have to send our kids back into school, and I think that might be a bit of a challenge point. I'm resistant to that happening until there's a vaccine, frankly, because there's not a lot of point for my family because we're not economically challenged by lockdown. But I also have enormous sympathy with friends and colleagues who are suffering quite significantly because they can't go to work and so on. So it's a difficult one. But
anyway. It is. Michelle was telling me, obviously the schools here aren't going back, but they're going to do like a drive-through graduation or something where people show up in their cars in little groups and they announce their name and they get their diploma and they leave. So it seems like they're all sort of creative. Well, we
sponsored by McDonald's, no doubt, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'll have a Big Mac and a graduation, please.
We have drive-through church here now. I don't know, drive-through baptism hasn't really caught on because of the water aspect of it. Anyway, so excellent. I don't know. I think we're all trying to keep humor during this time, and I really appreciated the last month's SMAF where the two guests talked about the responsibility we have as an industry, and I think that's very important. Meanwhile, you and I worked on an article on the greening of streaming, and of course, we're going to talk a little bit about that later. The other thing I've done is I've worked on a monetization survey that should come out here. The report for that should come out pretty soon. It was pre-COVID, but ultimately it was quite interesting to sort of see who monetizes, who doesn't, what the revenue streams are, and that kind of thing. Mark, I'm going to switch to you because you have these two giant faces looking over your shoulder, and you need to just tell us about this.
My background, yes, symbolizes my new very small overlords. They control my every move these days. That's my son Mark, and that's my daughter Katie.
Nice. And what have you been doing besides being, run ragged from that standpoint?
That's really about it. I haven't left the house in months. This is the first time I've put on a shirt all week. So, business as usual.
All right. Excellent. Well, we're glad to know that you'll get dressed up for us, even if that means just putting on a shirt.
This is the equivalent of getting dressed. No, the main thing that we're focused on these days is remote virtual events. We've got everyone from our normal customers calling us who had in-person boots on the ground events planned and they want to virtualize them, to a whole slew of new customers reaching out to us through various vectors to talk about doing the same. So it's brought in a bunch of business. Which hopefully will help make up for the fact that we've had a number of very large events cancel throughout the course of the rest of the year. So hoping for good things, hoping for a net positive at this point. But we're working a lot on new solutions. We just built a facility up in the Bay Area to handle this sort of thing. I can talk a little bit about that if you want, but it's proving to be the new model for live streaming, and so we're trying to get ahead of it at this point.
So is that the one in the Bay Area? Is that something that individual users can come in and use, or is it primarily a broadcast knock?
Less an insert studio. It's more like a remote MCR. So we have a skeleton crew who can come into that facility and pull in a number of remote guests over a number of different protocols, Skype or Zoom or what have you, and put them into a more traditional broadcast workflow with switchers and mixers and decks, and create a really tight broadcast quality show out of that facility. Lots of back end hand holding, lots of pre-production and prep of guests and that sort of thing, but it all comes back to that central facility, which we find is pretty crucial to making a really tight product.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think we're actually seeing a rise in the number of companies, LiveX and others, who the hand holding is key, because customers still want high quality production, but their assumption has always been they had to go to a studio as opposed to having the studio sort of be virtual or in the cloud. So
Right. Yeah, I think we're seeing a new education of of people, as to how they can make things look good at home. And we're doing a lot of that. We're sending out some equipment here and there, sending out some good webcams and mics and a little bit of lighting here and there if the situation warrants. But typically it's just a lot of, sit there, face the window, close your blinds, get rid of that glass,
put a
thing
lovely
behind you that's
map behind you.
exactly, put a half a map behind you, something like that. We're doing a lot of uh, mine diffusion, where we know where the mines are buried, and we're trying to diffuse them all for these customers, and it's proving to be a valued service.
That's a really good point. In fact, just before we went on the air, one of our guests mentioned, turning a phone off or putting it in airplane mode. That's the kind of thing you plan for everything, and suddenly that pops up in the middle, and somebody loses their focus. So,
Exactly.
Minesweeping is actually a great concept from that standpoint. Speaking of which, no segue at all, but Eric Schumacher Rasmussen, have you been sweeping any mines here recently, or
Well,
doing
I had my door shut, and the dog just walked in, opening my door, so that I can hear the TV out there that my kids are watching. But that's just life during that's just life right now.
And did the dog have a shirt on, or did the dog?
What's that? The dog? Well, now I have to do this, right? With his shaggy haircut, we gave him an at-home haircut. It could be better, but anyway, yeah. So Charlie will not be joining me for the entire show. He doesn't have a shirt, but he has a harness. Am I the only one who dresses normally these days?
Well, I literally.
The question is anybody wearing trousers? That's the question we've been asking on
I'm
Simpsons.
sorry, I can't answer that question. I literally just came out of the woods trying to find surveyor stakes, as Eric and Dom know. So I walked in. The closest shirt I could find is "Mom, Dad, I'm Gaelic." I grabbed that one, which looked much better than what I've been wearing in the woods. And went on.
Why were you walking in the woods without your trousers on, Tim?
No.
Zoom call's fine, but not the woods, yeah.
I was trying to, do that whole Good Morning America host who ended up with this. Anyway, all right. Sorry. Now that I'm flustered, Eric, please go
on. Yeah. So I've just been doing what everyone else has been doing, which is attending lots of online meetings and webinars, and we can talk about how Dom loves those, and some of us aren't quite as big of a fan. But I'm a huge fan of the online event that I've been putting together. We've been transitioning Streaming Media East to an online version. It was going to be in Boston this year in first week of June. Obviously, we can't do that. But when we get toward the end, why don't we talk a little bit more about upcoming events? Or maybe in a few minutes, we can talk about what looks like is happening with IBC. Yeah, we can talk about that and the Content Delivery Summit, which Dom is working on, of course.
In fact, I think
the other things that we're doing.
The context of sort of the return to normalcy, and we'll fit CDS and Stream Media East in there. Speaking of which, let's actually go to our guests first. And let's see, this month we have, is it Susannah Brady? Is that right? Okay. Susannah, tell us a little bit about your company, your focus in the industry. And I know, of course, we try to have someone from Women in Streaming Media every month, so we really appreciate your joining us.
No problem. So I had sales for the Americas for Cobalt Digital, and Cobalt designs and manufactures conversion, multi-viewer, throwdown, compression products for the production and television broadcast spaces. And Cobalt is also a founding member of the Open Gear initiative. So we have quite a number and the dozens of Open Gear products manufactured by Cobalt. And I also I am a co-chairman for the RIS Forum, and RIS stands for Reliable Internet Stream Transport. And that's, I think, probably some of the angle that we're going to use today, which is with the COVID, we've seen a lot of demand for RIS type technologies and deployments, with more people working from home and content being developed from, you know, the most unimaginable remote locations. So we've seen a rise on the demand for the conversation. So I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Sure, no worries. And tell us a little bit about Open Gear, because I don't think I'm familiar with that.
So Open Gear is a type of a consortium that was started about 15 years ago between the founder of Ross Video and Cobalt Digital. So those are the two companies that started initially. I guess a few others right after joined. And so this Open Gear, it's a platform that basically they have a 2-rack unit chassis frame, and with 20 slots, and any manufacturer in the world can develop, you know, cards for the chassis. So today there's dozens and dozens of manufacturers that are developing products from all sorts of functionality for this form factor. And so it's became quite pervasive out there. It's been deployed globally. I lost count of how many frames total the world has deployed on Open Gear, but I thought it was something under 15,000 frames already, and each one has 20 slots. So lots of products from lots of manufacturers.
Okay, and of course, Ross did a lot of matrix switches back in the day. The chassis could handle a matrix switch as well as things like transcoders as well, or? Yes,
it can handle anything from basic distribution amplifiers to complex transcoders, encoders, HVC, 4K. Cobalt's product line, for example, it's all based today on 12G, 4K, okay, HVC, all the, you know, 2110, all the latest and greatest. So you really find everything from a number of manufacturers. It's been very good to us to be part of this group.
Okay, good. Simon, introduce yourself a little bit about your company and your time in the industry. And you may have...
Oh, there we go. Hey. So, hi everybody. Yeah, so Simon Orme. So I'm part of the business development team at Media Melon. Media Melon's a West Coast startup focused on optimizing OTT streaming. I can talk a little bit about more of that in a minute. Where I came from, I started my career a number of years ago, shall we say, at the BBC. So I started off as a television engineer, went through the BBC's famous Evesham television engineering program. So I kind of learned how to build analog television systems. So that was kind of the way things were in those days. I then worked a little bit of time at in a consumer electronics manufacturer, NEC, when they had a consumer electronics business. That was in the back end of the 80s, when we saw in Europe the start of multi-channel television, and particularly satellite television. So a massive disruption to what had been an extremely sort of stable industry. So a lot of the learning of what happened there, not from a technical perspective, but from a sort of consumer behavior and a business and industry and finance perspective, has sort of flowed through into what we're seeing now in the 21st century, with the advent of very different types of distributing content. So that's always been a very interesting aspect of it for me. I then came in the noughties. I came into BT and led a team in our in the broadcast services industry. So I built probably the UK's first digital workflow back in about 2000, 2002, that sort of time. I remember when we built our first petabyte storage environment. It was about the size of a double-decker bus. You know, those were exciting times. Cost an absolute fortune. But anyway, things moved on. But that kind of morphed its way into what is BT Sport and, you know, BT's digital content engines today. So I came out of, I sort of very much come out of, like many of us, I think, out of that broadcast mindset centric infrastructure, sort of build it in the core, understand what's going on there. But then I moved in about 2008 for the first time, having been in BT on and off for 15 years. I moved for the first time into a network unit, which was kind of interesting. And I moved into their wholesale broadband team and spent the next 10 years, I guess, sort of getting right deep into broadband, but particularly from the perspective of how you deliver content over last mile networks. And that's really been the sort of interest for me over the last few years, sort of understanding that you can invest everything you like in the core, but if you're delivering stuff over IP, you really need to understand what's happening at the edge, because from a consumer experience point of view, it is the edge that is driving their experience as much as it is, and I would argue perhaps more the core. And that's why I moved over to work for Media Melon, because Media Melon have some fantastic quality of experience technology that dynamically manages experience at the edge. So I can talk about that a little bit more later on.
Yeah. So
I'm Tim. I'm just going to step in. I always blow a little bit of smoke at Simon, because I met Simon because he was the man who enabled BT's multicast, and you all know I'm passionate about multicast. But I must have met Simon at the beginning of that adventure, and I was bouncing around enthusing about how multicast was the future and incredibly important. But I'd had a previous experience, maybe 4 or 5 years before, trying to convince people in BT, and decided it was a dinosaur that just didn't want to get to the future. And Simon, somehow, I don't know how you do it, but literally my hat off to you. You somehow managed to get them to do it, which was incredible.
Yeah. It was a funny story, because I was actually, I said I moved into the networks part, and I was dragged into there because of my content and sort of media technology experience. And I was dragged in there to build a CDN, strangely. So to build a CDN in the wholesale ISP network, and on the surface, that looked like a good plan. And indeed, we did some extraordinary things with the regulator that I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about or not, but let's go. So, I mean, it's a bit of an aside.
You can talk about anything on this show. There's no commercial.
Yeah, I've got some interesting stories all over.
So at the time, we're talking 2008, 9, 10 here. At the time, the UK market, like many developed markets, was highly regulated. So the broadband market. So areas that were economically hard to reach, which was most of the UK, was a monopoly delivered by BT, and therefore the regulator put very strict controls, with price controls and all sorts of controls on what could and could not be done, and the way that had to be sold into the wider ISP market, and which is entirely logical. Over time, of course, that economics changed. DSL came in, and all these exchanges got unlocked, and the independent ISP market sort of developed, and that was fantastic. But at that time, we started to understand, or a few of us started to understand, kind of video could be quite big over the internet and could have quite a big impact. And once we started, I mean, forget live for the minute, that's where we'll come on to the multicast story, but at the time, everything was VOD. And naturally, as we all know from CDNs, pretty much concentrated on a relatively small amount of content, which was being consumed in increasingly large volumes. And most of that content was coming from a small number of providers, aka the catch-up TV broadcasters, so BBC, ITV, etc., iPlayer, and all that malarkey. And so we kind of worked out that actually, if we could build an environment that hosted that kind of content in a CDN, we could make for the UK an incredibly economically efficient industry that would benefit everybody. That was our kind of mindset. So we came up with this idea of building a video internet. So if you like, treating very differently interactive internet content, click on this, click on that, download this, download that, search on Google, all that traditional internet stuff, treat it very differently from real-time services like streaming. That was the view. And it seemed a good idea. And then we bumped into the regulator, and they said, you must be joking. The internet's the internet. Everything is common. We've got all these various principles. But over a period of about a year, amazingly, we did persuade them that we could build at the wholesale layer a video internet that would deliver video traffic at a markedly more economic rate than regular internet traffic, because we argued that was, it was more efficient to do that. If we could build a scale caching environment that everybody could get access to, we could build the economics that could work, and we could invest like that. So it was a great plan, but it fell foul of the internal politics within BT. And so unfortunately the CDN did get built, but it never got made available. So anyway, so that was a kind of a disappointment. But when I first came into that unit, the first thing that went through my mind, particularly having come from a broadcast service division, was, but how the hell are we going to deliver live content? Because people were already talking about sport at that time. And so whilst that CDM project was going on and we were bashing the regulator and battling with internal politics, myself and someone in my team, called Rory Murphy, went out and started designing and developing this multicast idea, which I thought had much more legs, and indeed it did. And somehow, as Dom said, somehow we managed to persuade people to build the damn thing. And it was never in anyone's plan, but it kind of got built. And yeah, that is how BT Sport is delivered. And if it wasn't there, there would be no BT Sport. And of course, BT Sport was transformational in 2016-17, whenever it was, when BT pitched in for those Premier League rights and turned the whole market on its head. Kind of a little bit water under the bridge now, but at the time, that was a pretty radical move. Yeah, so multicast became a very exciting part, surely that middle of the last decade. Yeah.
Now Mark's in the chat. Mark De Jong is in the chat room, and he's just asked me how I always managed to bring multicast into the conversation somehow. I've commented back that my wife asks me the same thing. So there you go.
It's the future, guys. It's the future.
Nice.
Back to
Dom,
Tim.
you are to multicast what Christopher Levy is to DRM, sir.
There you go. That'll do. I take that as a badge of. I take that.
I'm not going to say anything about that at the moment. So Simon, you actually took me down memory lane a bit too, because if you remember, was it BT tried to buy MCI after Concert, and of course WorldCom jumped in and grabbed MCI, and I was working on a project with the MCI guys trying to get a CDN set up for content over here in the States for live. So that's kind of fascinating. When you talk about the regulators and DSL, in the States we had, the Baby Bells, and Ameritech was the one. Eric, was Ameritech up in your area, or was it just over in Michigan and like that?
That was up here too.
Okay, so I did a project with Ameritech when they looked at doing DSL. They were the only place they could put D-slams where they could make money on it was in Detroit, but it turned out the regulators didn't like the whole not skirting regulations with non-regulated devices sitting in the slick. That was the big conversation, was, can it sit in the slick? If it can, it needs to be regulated. And so, like you, there was sort of this battle back and forth. So wow, that lots of interesting memories from the late 90s and early aughts. So all right, Dom, what's our first topic that we're going to talk about today?
So I think we should start where we are with OTT usage during COVID off our list, because I think we can get that done and then move on to happier topics. But I think there's been, I can't remember if it was during SMAF last time, if it was just after that, but just to sort of set the scene, I dialed into the Internet Service Providers Association meeting because just as the lockdowns are starting to happen, just as the discussions about Netflix and YouTube reducing their top rate availabilities were sort of topical and so on. And I thought I'd actually dial into the ISPA meeting. I'm still a sort of periphery participant in ISPA and listen to what the ISPs over here in the UK were saying. And it was I found it very interesting that the main focus of conversation that the ISPs was not about traffic volumes. And this is a common misconception that's put out about internet, the internet's capacity. Obviously, I won't make any friends in the CDN industry by saying this, but the CDNs do like to give the impression that capacity is scarce on the internet, and in practice, capacity is far from scarce. The trick is all about managing your 95th percentile and your average traffic flows. And most of the networks are scaled to tolerate boosts, if you like, or bursts of traffic many, many times their average throughput to deal with live events and so on. So despite the public perception that, oh my God, everyone's suddenly streaming, there must be a drought in capacity on the internet, in practice, the internet service providers are actually much more focused on business premises which were vacant during lockdown, and how long businesses would continue to pay their business subscriptions for empty offices which weren't using the internet services. And they were much more focused about that termination of contract and when that was pending than they were about capacity. Capacity has not been a problem. So I think people might experience it a little bit more at home because, like today, I've just been upstairs and told my family, no, please don't do 3 Zooms and stream a Netflix stream while I'm doing SMAF. And I think people are in consumer environments.
It's called Ethernet. You know, you can.
Well, I actually do have a magic button. I can press it if it starts wigging out, but we won't be doing that. But I think the interesting thing is this perception that the internet is suddenly squeaking at the edges because everybody's discovered streaming during COVID. I think is a bit of a misperception. I don't think that's actually true. I think there will be obviously niches where that is the case, but I would challenge that, and I think that there are bigger commercial issues which face ISPs, which are much more to do with, you know, people spending £1,000 a month for a business premises that's got no one in it for their internet connection, and how quick that churn will arrive. So I don't know if that sets the scene a little bit, but I think things aren't quite always as they seem.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the number of anecdotal stories you get of people during the day complaining that the internet's not working, and you know, anybody who understands how the internet's built knows that during the day the internet's pretty much empty, and people working from home is going to make absolutely zippo difference to the network. So I think one of the things that is not being maybe for obvious reasons publicized is that the issues that people are having are going to be at the server end. So too many people hitting the Zoom server, too many people hitting, you know, whatever application it is that they're trying to run, that are not designed for internet working. They're designed for running over the corporate network, which isn't working, or people are on VPNs that are maxing out. You know, it's a very different set of issues.
The problems are at the application layer, definitely.
So Susannah, you mentioned RIST. How does that play into this sort of work from home model versus just sort of standard business day model?
Yeah, so for example, everybody here is aware that in the beginning, the ABR field was pretty much fragmented between HLS, HDS, which was like an Adobe thing, Smooth Streaming, which is a Microsoft thing, and then I'll go on and on and on until Dash came up, which was more like a result of a group of people, and then SMAF. Well, this was all developed for the consumer space, right? So then when the broadcasters were looking into streaming, there were a few companies that came up with broadcast protocols in the last few years. But the problem was that, and again, the protocol was trying to reach primarily low latency and reliability, streaming over the internet. And so those protocols that those companies came up with were fine, and they worked well, but they were proprietary. So there was no common and interoperable specification. So around 2017, the Video Services Group, the VSF, created this RIST activity group with a mission to come up with a common and interoperable specification for solving the problem. And so all the top companies in the field all over the world were invited, and they look at all best of class technologies out there. They use as many established standards as they could. And the result was RIST, which is really allowing users from all over the world to plug and play a mix of vendors, mix and match of vendors throughout the workflow and on both ends of the workflow. So yeah, in 2018, they came up with a simple profile, which was the first technical recommendation that really addresses reliability and low latency. Again, like no one had ever done before. It really seems the best way of doing it. And there's several comparisons to the prior existing proprietary solutions, but this is what, including the proprietary companies who came up with the proprietary solutions back in the day, they joined RIST also, and they helped brainstorm this new way of doing things that would be more interoperable. And so RISC Simple Profile came out in 2018, like I said, addressing reliability and low latency. And just a couple of months ago in 2020, they released the second technical recommendation that it addresses in-band data, authentication, encryption, and you know, a number of other things, which is called the RISC main profile. So that's the second portion. And now the group is working on the next chapter, which is going to be the enhanced profile. But that's
Susannah, if there, sorry, Tim, can I just step into the question? Yeah. Susannah, if you were to give us like a few key differentiators, what would be the key differentiators, say, against say I don't know, SRT, ZXI, Aspera, some of those types of protocols?
Yes, so SRT, for example, RISC is based on streaming protocols. SRT is based on the UDT file transfer protocol. So it's like a little bit more limiting and older. Then on the encryption side, for example, SRT focuses on PSK encryption only. Preset key. RISC focus on, also has PSK with, you know, with key rotation, but also supports DTLS, which the activity group, the engineering group, look into various options, and they realized that DTLS would work best. And I actually heard this morning, there was a webinar on this. The reason why they chose DTLS was because the handshaking on how it does the security, it actually takes a second or very, very little compared to all the other modes of encryption that take 3, 4, 5 seconds or more. So in order to leverage and optimize the delay and the latency that you already deal with over the internet, they chose the TLS, for example. Another thing is RISC develop bonding, combining multiple links into one higher capacity link. SRT, this is not available in SRT. They say they're going to try to come up with it soon, but they haven't yet. RISC supports seamless switching, which is not available in SRT. There are a number, like RISC is compatible with CENTID 2022, you know, for error correction. SRT doesn't support it, and RISC does no packet deletion for transport streams, so packet optimization up to 5%, not available on SRT. So there's a number of categories, but overall an interesting comparison and note that one of our colleagues did, Wes Simpson from the VSF, is that really you can compare SRT and RISC to the early days on Dash. So, for example, SRT was developed. Well, actually, it's okay. I won't go there. But there's several differences between SRT and RISC. And like I said, the SRT major creator of the protocol also joined the forum as an active participant. So we're quite happy about that.
So before I pop back over to OTT a little bit, I did have a question, because ProMPEG, of course, was a standard prior to ZXI and prior to SRT. It did okay with forward error correction. You know, I was going to ask about FEC, and you mentioned that in there. One of the things that seems to be beneficial in some of the proprietary solutions is the ability to handle, especially on the acquisition side or ingest, to be able to handle, you know, more intermittency in the network. How is RISC set up from that standpoint? And did you say 5% sort of packet loss on the FEC side?
Yeah, we're claiming about 5% of you know, packet optimization with and you know, the null packets. So
okay,
that's what it's been doing. It's been superior. Of course, we are constantly comparing against what's out there. So, for example, if a link fails, if it frees up about 5% bandwidth, that could then be reused for other purposes. So basically, with RISC, you do not waste any internet bandwidth whatsoever.
Okay, because I came out of video conferencing, and of course we did bonding of ISDN Bs to be able to, to pull up. But we had the problem where we had to packet flood an extra 15% just to essentially deal with forward error correction. What percentage of additional overhead are you having to see to be able to sort of guarantee a signal make it through on the ingest side?
Yeah, exactly. And then one other thing the RIST addresses is retransmission, bandwidth throttling. So under like heavy loss, the engineers noticed that the RIST link simply shut down due as excess of retransmissions, cause even more loss. So it just keeps it keeps getting worse. And so with RIST, you have minimum service impact during the link breakdown. So that's what we've been noticing. It's amazing, and there's a number of advantages that I started helping them a few months ago, and I'm just impressed with the group of people, because they really got the best of the best, and we're constantly recruiting and wanting more people to join, whether it's an individual or as a company, because they want to adopt RIST. We started recruiting members about a year ago. We have over close to 70 members now. So there's about a company joining every week. So it's growing very rapidly.
And very interesting. So Simon, I think before I joined the pre-call, you all were discussing the fact that OTT usage increases may actually negatively impact the OTT providers like a Netflix or Disney or Hulu or whomever.
An interesting phenomenon. Of course, we all assume, and I would say hope, that this is a temporary phenomenon. But I think one of the interesting things about it is that certainly all the surveys I've kind of ever read for the past 20, 30 years kind of says that TV viewing is like a zero-sum game. So the changes in the actual number of hours individuals spend watching TV has never really changed. I mean, it's pretty stable. Even from when there was like 4 channels to being 400 channels, actually the amount of TV viewing doesn't really change that much. So kind of if you think what's happening, and that's just to do with how much time, disposable time people have for that activity. Of course, if everyone's at home, not working, unlike Dom, of course, but others, who just don't have a job to go to or are stuck at home, whatever it is, then they have more disposable time. Therefore, they might look at TV as one of the things they can do with that time, and hence you get that bubble of demand. But the logic says that is going to go away. So yeah, my point was that while that's there from many companies, that will just result in an increase in cost if it's the existing subscriber base. Now, I'm talking particularly about subscription services, unless as a result of this, some behavior changes for the longer term. So maybe, I don't know, whatever it is, 10%, 15% of that base decide this is so good, I'm actually going to permanently change my way of viewing, and I'm a new subscriber into one of these services, a Netflix or a Disney Plus or whatever it is.
So I've been actually listening in on some of the stock calls because I've been interested in that very thing. And what we saw, of course, was Roku rose dramatically early in the lockdowns, at least in the States and the UK. Netflix did as well. And then when it seemed like things were starting to get better, their stock started to drop off on the assumption it wasn't going to be sustained. What Netflix said, I think they added 16 million new subscribers. What they said is essentially, we feel we're going to carry a portion of that through, but we can't give guidance on what it is. Limelight CEO, interestingly, said they had to Mark East's point, they had to replace a lot of their live events like March Madness with other events that they're doing, or an increase in on-demand traffic. His point in it was, perhaps, like you said, we'll get to learned behavior where people will have made it over the hump that they want to do it through OTT rather than doing it through traditional cable or satellite. But again, the uncertainty on how much, how many people will have essentially jumped the shark is a big question. Does anybody else have sort of comment on that?
Yeah, and to Simon's point, regarding regarding the fact that OTT services get money from subscriptions, not usage. Hub Entertainment Research here in the States just put out a report indicating, and they actually looked specifically at consumers who were self-isolating, consumers where both parents and children were home self-isolating. And they said that households sheltering at home with children have an average of 7.5 services. There's no way that's sustainable. And there's no way that people are going to keep all those services once mom and dad go back to work and once the kids go back to school, right? So, and then you add into that the fact that there's a great degree of economic uncertainty. You know, people may have cut the cord in terms of cable and switched over to OTT to save money. But I wonder if, for instance, you know, Hulu Live, YouTube Live, those are relatively expensive monthly services.
Yeah.
And if, you know, we in our household went through the process of subscribing to Hulu Live for a number of years, but we still had Netflix, and then we added Disney Plus, and we looked at our bill and finally said that the live service was not worth paying for. You know, it's an open question as to whether or not people are going to start trimming back some of these services and what they're going to look at as extras versus what's necessary.
I'd be curious to know that report. What were the criteria for services? Does that mean paid subscription services, or does that include Crackle and all the stuff that you get with your new TV and that sort of stuff?
Good point. Good point. Right, because I suppose I've got a subscription to. We just got a new LG TV in the house, and there's a subscription to something on there that I'm not aware of. Good point. But I would think though that if they're asking the consumers, you know, what services do you have? They're the ones that the consumers know about, whether or not they act, and which would suggest that they actually use them. But that's a really good point.
But I think even beyond what Mark is saying, we've got a number of service providers who are providing 2-month trials now, 60-day trials. Stars, for instance, Michelle had that. We get married. I'm like, okay, drop that because I can turn around and get 2.5 months for free and $5 for, you know, for the next 3 months after that. So I think that's even if they know they have it, the question is, are they paying? What's the average that they're paying for? It would be a fascinating piece. Dom, you all have been doing, I'm assuming you're continuing this month with the whole social distancing party and live rather than just over the top. Give us a little bit of feedback from that perspective.
Yeah, I wanted to raise that because it's I don't know whether it's the Englishman in me, but I like to champion the underdog a little bit. And going back to this conversation I was having with many of you at IBC last year, despite the fact that there are many webcasts going on, I still avoid webcasts which are focused on who is going to be the winner out of Netflix and Disney and Hulu and so on, because it's not, despite the fact that the mass media has decided that this is what streaming is, it's only a tiny part of what streaming is for me. And actually streaming for me is a whole plethora of things. It includes audio streaming, it includes what we're doing here, it includes Zoom conferencing and so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, as we mentioned last time, the social distancing dance parties and the isolation parties that we've been throwing on my hobby internet radio show are just continuing to explode. And I think one of the most interesting things about lockdown is people have discovered that hanging out with friends in a virtual environment isn't something that's the preserve of Dom and his weird geeky friends anymore. It's actually something that you can do with your mum, you can do with your mates, you can do in a way that sitting down and having a drink with a friend who's 300 miles or 3,000 miles away from you is not something that they've done before, but they've discovered that actually, instead of watching Netflix in an evening, they can actually hang out with people they haven't seen for a while and they can socialize online. So, what we found with the social distancing parties on the Thursday night show is the audiences are steadily increasing. And the most important thing for us is the residual audience is discovering other nights that we're programming. We've gone from being just a Thursday night show to being a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, and a Sunday afternoon show. And what's nice is the audiences are mixing up. So we did an event for a brewery last Friday. And some of those people have been coming back to some of the events we did on Monday. They're coming back on Thursday, and they've discovered a new alternative to Netflix and so on. So the lockdown, if anything, is changing behavior. And while that behavior isn't yet on the radar of the Bloombergs of the world who want to sit there and basically blow smoke up the market makers' backsides about how legacy TV models are going to persist despite the disruption of streaming, streaming itself is already being disrupted by streaming in terms of OTT one-to-many, you know, Hulu, Netflix, and so on. It itself is being disrupted. My kids, they're never watching TV. They're on, you know, my older kid's just permanently glued to a combination of WhatsApp and TikTok. That is her video entertainment. You know, yes, she does watch some Netflix to relax, but we've got a whole new disruptive wave that nobody's talking about. There are 450, is it, million subscribers now on Zoom, up from 25 like 4 months ago. I mean, that dwarfs Netflix, and it makes.
Yeah,
It's a huge change. It's a huge behavioral change. Sorry, Susanna.
no, I was just gonna say sure, and then you know, it all comes down to cost and these new lifestyles and high latency. You know, if you look at the main application, I'm looking at from the broadcaster's point of view is obviously live sports, and I was reading recently that a research showed that a majority of the 81% of sports fans subscribers to pay TV services, they would cut the cord if they could access everything, you know, all the content to OTT, for example. And
yeah, Mark's just commented in the chat room. You know, Reed Hoskins was saying that Netflix's main competition is gaming, not other OTTs. And you know, this is real. For me, my 10-year-old internet radio station was something that 80 people listened to. Now we're getting 500, 1,000, 1,500 people tuning in, and we've added all sorts of interactive elements and so on. That's because of lockdown, but people have discovered that it's okay to geek out and hang out doing something that's completely not just a one-to-many, sit back, press go, stare at the screen for 3 hours and then go to bed. Actually, you can almost live a socialized life. And it's not social media. This is something I think completely, well, it's not new, but it's being perceived by the mass market as something that's new, and it's acceptable to say to people, hey, let's do a quiz, let's have a quiz game together on Zoom. And that's here to stay regardless of lockdown, I think. And that's brilliant for our industry. That's why everyone in the industry is looking tired at the moment, because we're almost fighting fires, keeping it going. It's crazy.
And I think to Susanna's point, to have interactivity, you have to have the low latency. So that piece becomes even more and more critical.
yeah, because high latency can contribute to a sense of lagging that basically can ruin the viewer's experience. And so with this, you know, when I read this research, I'm like, okay, well, there's a massive monetization market that's open for low latency video streaming business too, in addition to all the social and just the gatherings and the just informal.
I think 2021 is going to be the year WebRTC. Well, sorry, 2020 is going to be the year WebRTC truly comes of age. I'm really glad to see the session protocols back in, and I think that there's still some maturity WebRTC has. You know, Eric was part of an event yesterday, which was fantastic, but it had some problems, and those were, I think, largely down to WebRTC deployments. But if people spent half as much energy now sorting out WebRTC as they do trying to shave quarter of a second off these pseudo low latency protocols, which, I mean, for me, 3-4 seconds is not low latency. For me, low latency is 600 milliseconds and less. And I think WebRTC is coming through fast, and it's taken a while for the CDNs to work out how to carry it. Some of the major CDNs still haven't even started a deployment, and I think that is going to change things. It's the question I asked Pantos at the end of Streaming Media West last year. Once you've got low latency, why would you opt for high latency? It's just, I can't see it being viable. You know,
There's no going back. Yeah.
So I think one thing, Susanna, that when you mentioned that about sport, what I find is fascinating that consistently for me over the last 5 years, my friends who would say, I want to cut the cord, I won't do it because of breaking news in sport. Interestingly, they have no sport to watch now. So that sort of goes away, at least for this brief period of time. And in news, I think his sort of that barrier is dropped because you can get most of that information, you know, live through YouTube, what have you. Do you think we're at a point where, if this goes on long enough, that consumer behavior will be, I'll just go ahead and cut the cord completely because I'm not getting a sports fix out of live TV? Or do you think we'll shift back toward traditional television for live sport, because it's not, it's lower latencies than what we're getting in streaming.
Well, I think that if it's hard to tell, but I think that at least the research was trying to say that the sports fan is is like, that's one big thing about live broadcasting. It's definitely the sports portion of it. So those sports fans, I continue to hang on to it. But you're right. If there are no sports for a while, I personally think eventually, if we're still, going back to the new normal, I think the new normal is going to include sports events without crowds. Unfortunately, probably the broadcasters will be there, the trucks, the ENG, all the trucks will be outside. There's going to be a contribution distribution, but there's not going to be the crowd. So maybe the stadiums are going to hurt. Some of the more consumer-oriented activities. But I think they're going to try to resume sports soon, one way or another, and the viewers are still going to be watching. It's just, they're not going to be able to watch, on site. So I think, but as far as, if there's no sports for a long time more, probably we're going to see a lot of drop. As a matter of fact, there's been a lot of drop in fan subscribers so far. That's what I've been reading anyway. I don't know about you guys, but
it'll be interesting to see if there's a rebound as we start to come out of this in people going back to traditional services who had previously cut the cord. I just pulled up a article from Fortune that came out a couple days ago, talking about how let's see, more than 1.6 million subscribers to 5 of the largest pay TV companies cut service in the first quarter. That's 70% jump from a year earlier. So I think it's safe to say that the lockdown measures have increased cord cutting quite a bit. Seems like,
and in this, Mark, we also have new services that are coming out. Is it Quibi? I'm really bad. So let's talk about that briefly, because if the assumption is that people are cutting the cord and going over, are new services seeing higher uptake, lower uptake?
Well, I think Quibi is probably an outlier. I think if you read there's a couple articles in or the one article that I posted into the Flipboard that talks about why Quibi has by most accounts failed, is because Hollywood billionaires really drastically misjudged the market, and they started with a content play. They started with, we're going to transform media, everything's going to be vertical aspect ratio, and it's going to be in 10-minute blocks, and you're going to love it. It's going to be the new TV, and no one's loving it. No one wanted it. They didn't build a user base. They didn't build a community around it to begin with. They didn't do a lot of the things that you have to do to launch a new platform like that. And
not only that, people aren't necessarily using their phones to consume content when they're sitting at home. They do that if they're out and about, but they're going to tend to watch it on a wider 16.
That's an excellent point. I wonder how much of Quibi's model depended on a typical user experience without people spending a lot more time sitting on their couch at home. Yeah,
that was their whole pitch. That was their whole pitch. Even if you look in their ads, I mean, people were shown watching Quibi episodes in their van or in their on the subway, and so they're not doing that now.
Yeah, it's very true. That and the content sucks. So
as I said earlier, though, if you lie on your side on your sofa, Quibi could be. Never mind.
Well, that depends if your orientation lock is on or not, Dom, right? So, all right. So
I've got an orientation lock on my TV. I don't know what TV you've got.
All right. So we've got 6 minutes. We need to talk real quick about events that are coming up. We'll talk a little bit about Stream Media East and CDS, but as I understand it at this point, a lot of us were sort of shooting toward September with IBC. If we had a bookmaker here, what would the expectation be that we're all going to be at IBC?
Well, the Dutch health minister was quoted in the New York Times today talking about sports, saying that sporting events can resume in September, because right now the Dutch order on against mass gatherings goes until September 1. He said today that sporting events can happen after September 1, but no fans in the stands. And he said no fans until, no mass gatherings. He didn't refer to anything other than sports, but no mass gatherings until there's a vaccine, or January 2021, whichever, you know.
Wow. Okay.
So,
well, and obviously IBC is an indoor event, so even if they allowed outdoor events, the likelihood of indoor is pretty slim.
Is it? I always spend my time on the beach. That's outdoors.
Well,
maybe we could just do it at the beach.
Right. We know where to find you, but there are some of us who go to the press room and have a coffee and, you know,
Good God,
walk around the show floor. I know
just because it's free coffee. It's just because it's free coffee.
Anyway, so what I hear you saying, Eric, is the likelihood is fairly high from IBC's standpoint. And of course, NAB had to cancel in person, but they're now rolling into this virtual event sometime in
right.
And
Susanna, you were talking, I mean, I don't know if it's something you can share about the number of exhibitors that you've heard have already said they're not going to be at IBC.
I heard offline that one other exhibitor heard directly from IBC. There's a second, third hand, but I heard that a little over 20% of the exhibitors already canceled. We canceled. Cobalt Digital is not going to be part of this setup like this, because it's just not going to be safe. I think everything has to be set up as the new normal. That's they call phase 2 when you start opening up. And so we need to see what the new normal is going to be in order for us to be able to drive masses to a specific location. For all of us who have been to IBC, obviously there's a lot of crowded areas. Pretty much the entire time you're there, you're in a crowded area somehow. Getting to the event, at lunch, etc. So I doubt we bet that there's no event. And as a matter of fact, NAB is continuing to push NAB New York, which is a little bit after IBC, and I don't know. I personally don't think that none of these events would take place this
plus which, since we guys can't get haircuts, we'll all look like hippies or John Lennon anyway, so it would be hard to sort of tell. Well, Dom, I think you have the hat because of maybe a receding hairline. I don't know. But
don't be ridiculous. I've got far too much hair. Look at that, man. No, ridiculous. I got that.
All right. Hey, look,
hair's out of control.
We were able to get Dom to take his hat off. So my hat's off to you as well, Dom. Talk about CDS, because yours is one of the events coming up. But let me also ask Simon real quick. Simon, what events are you doing that are sort of?
Well, our main event would have been IBC this year. We don't do that many events because we're still coming up that startup phase. So but IBC was very good for us last year, really valuable. So we would have done it again. So that is a bit of a rethink. I think one of the things I was just thinking about what Don was saying earlier on about the number of kind of web calls that we're on. So we are doing a lot of those, and I think one of the interesting things for a small company, there's a bit of leveling up going on. So we always, as a small company, always feel slightly disadvantaged that you can't put a team on a plane and fly them halfway around the world to a meeting, to a face-to-face meeting, but nobody can. So suddenly we're all on web calls, and we're quite enjoying that in terms of getting in front of customers virtually. But that's kind of where we're focused at the minute.
All right, Dom, CDS.
Yeah, here. I just want to second what Simon said. I think that's an absolute benefit of what's going on at the moment. And actually, that does segue quite nicely in. A CDS Content Delivery Summit this year is going to be really quite different. Eric and I spent much of March, I think it was, looking at different ways to virtualize the Content Delivery Summit. And in a strange way, we sort of came full circle and decided that actually in its specific setup, Content Delivery Summit was going to work as a one-day-long Zoom meeting. It's just the easiest tool to use to bring everyone together. I've been doing lots and lots of Zoom, so I can both chair and actually do the production function, muting microphones, bringing people in and out. Effectively, what I'm doing here, and it's interesting because CDN's a kind of very niche market. and getting speakers to travel to niche market events can be a bit tricky. But actually filling up the panels and the discussion through the Content Delivery Summit this year has been really straightforward, because people don't have to get on planes. They can, and I've got speakers that I would never have normally been able to get hold of to take part. So, and also one of the big bonuses is in terms of the audience, it's going to be free. So it's free to register. We've already got a really large response on pre-registrations and so on, or at least I think we have, Eric.
Yep, we do.
Confirm that. He's got visibility of those numbers, but it's great. And I'm continuing to reshape the program so that we're going to be spending the morning looking at the vendor supply chain into CDNs, which is completely new as far as the Content Delivery Summit's concerned. And then the afternoon will go up into the application layer where the CDNs bring all that underlying infrastructure together and create the services that they then offer out to the end users, with the sort of finish of the show being focused on futures of edge computing and where edge computing and CDN are mixing. And also, just to chip in one last thing, which I'm sure will sort of come up as we wrap up in a minute or two, but as a sort of chairman's prerogative, I'm going to be relying on you, Tim and Eric, to help me drive the conversation about power efficiency in the CDN, because we are seeing, the three of us have been doing some research. There's articles coming out in the next week or two. I'm looking for Eric to nod there.
2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3. So there's some articles coming out that we've done quite a lot of research on, looking at how much electricity, how much power demand streaming as a whole, right from the CPE through the telco networks to the CDNs and so on, how much power that demands, and whether the architects of these CDNs and streaming services can actually make 10% differences in their efficiency end to end. We could be saving volumes of electricity that can be measured in quantities of power stations. So I'm looking forward to that element of the discussion being driven into the discussion, because I want to break us out of a simple price and performance discussion. We've now got to talk about power as both a cost and a part of our business, but also obviously the climate impacts of that. So look out for greeningofstreaming.org. Oh, Mark, you're trying to pick a fight with me.
I don't know what you're talking about. Did my background change? I'm sorry.
The good news with,
another overlord there.
The good news with all this is that with all this current climate of uncertainty and all the the sudden surge in remote working and all the problems and issues, I think this group here is more relevant than ever. Like trying to figure out solutions and ways of better streaming. So
absolutely, I think it's
everyone
going to be really interesting from that.
Dom held an event just before last SMAF, where one of the best questions on it was a lady who was a yoga instructor who said, how do I keep my headphones on when I turn upside down, while I do a video chat? And it's those practical kinds of things that we in the industry need to think through, as Mark talked about, mind sweeping and that type of thing. Yeah. Eric, you have a background now that suddenly has changed as well.
Yes. Yeah, we are switching the entirety of Streaming Media East online. We have a week of webinars we're calling Streaming Media East Connect, and we will be having 10 webinars over the course of 4 days from June 2nd to 5th, covering everything from codecs to OTT usage to what we've learned as a result of COVID-19. So we are looking forward to that. CDS, Content Delivery Summit, will be on June 1. Streaming Media East Connect will be June 2nd through the 5th. Like Content Delivery Summit, all of the webinars will be free to attend. We've got several hundred registrations already, and looking forward to that. And we also decided that the best way to approach this was to go with Zoom. It was funny because in the event I was in yesterday, the Virtual Video Summit, they used a virtual events platform that worked well. And one of the attendees in my breakout room afterwards said, I can't believe you guys are using Zoom. You're streaming media. Why are you using Zoom? Well, it's the same reason Dom is for Content Delivery Summit. It's because it's the lowest barrier to entry. It pretty much just works. Everyone knows how it works. And so that makes things really easy for everyone. Real quick, we're also doing a week of workshops, with Streaming Media University workshops. Tim, I see you're backing up looking like you're in a lineup, a police lineup.
Yeah, no, I changed my background as well, but it required
Yeah.
removing some pins. Sorry.
Right. We've got 3-hour workshops from Jan Ozer, Nadine Krefitz, and Robert Reinhardt the week before Streaming Media East Connect. Those we are charging for, but it's a 3-hour deep dive into adaptive bitrate encoding or FFmpeg or cloud streaming tools. So it's well worth it. So we'll see you online in another month. And I suppose we should mention that will impact the date of next month's SMAF, right?
It will.
Right.
Don,
Yes.
you want to talk about that?
That's right. Yeah, we're going to shift SMAF back 1 week because we were all going to be on a flight. We had a little debate about what we were going to do originally, and we thought we were just going to skip the month. Then we decided, because of everything changed and we're all around, we thought we'd go ahead with it. Then we realized it was right at the same time as about 15 seminars that Eric's trying to be in at the same time, and unfortunately we only have one Eric, so we couldn't do SMAF at the same time. So we decided to shift back to the second Thursday, just this once. The second Thursday, same time as normal, 5 p.m. UK, 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. But we're going to shift it back 1 week, and we might just convince some of our sprogs to come on, because I think the aim is next month to see what the kids' view of streaming is, and I'm certainly working on mine to see if they'll come and talk. Maybe Mark can enlighten us on what's going on in the world of infants, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, the babies are definitely driving my choices in terms of content networks.
Maybe you could go for IP nanny cams as your theme next month.
There we go.
Or he can sing everything from Bubble Guppies for us if he wants to.
Fantastic.
So, Tim, do you want to wind us out with the guests, and then I'll wrap the.
Sure. Suzana, thank you for coming on and talking not just about sort of the focus of women in streaming media, but RIST. That's actually something I'm not familiar with. I'm quite intrigued to read more on. Where would I actually go to find more details around RIST?
Okay, wonderful. Yes, so RIST is open spec and open source, and a very, very quick implementation. There's all kinds of tools available. So anyone can go to RIST.tv, and basically you have all the members, all the more active participants. And if you guys, when all these upcoming events would like to include RIST to be a speaker or panelist, we have phenomenal speakers. We've been participating in all kinds of opportunities just to promote and get the word out there, just because it's so open and open standard. We just want to get as many members as possible.
I think it would, Eric, if I can interject just real quick, I think it would be super interesting for any of the shows coming up that may be part of Connect to have someone, a big proponent of RIST and a big proponent of SRT, and someone from the Zixi team on a panel together talking about, the future of IP contribution and doing a shootout.
And
for lack of a
even
better
somebody
term.
from IEEE, because obviously we've got the standards.
Yeah, for sure.
Well.
Yep.
Well, we could always look at doing a SMAF special if Eric's had to drop off because he's got another webcast to go and do. But we could look at doing a SMAF special. And Mark Simondowski's been on here before, so maybe Susanna, we can talk about that offline and bring that together. That would be good.
That'd be good. All right, Simon. Again, thank you for coming on and jogging memory lane for. I was thinking symphony, and I had to go back and remember to concert with MCI. not that, but thank you for that. And from a Media Melon standpoint, are there webinars that people might be able to attend, or information?
What we have just done is put up a fantastic case study up on our website. We've just deployed a tool we have called Smart Play with Telecine in Brazil, the largest movie distributor in Brazil. They've been running, in fact, it was just about a pop-up, wasn't it? They've been running AWS Elemental content-aware encoding. So, obviously one of the purposes of that sort of leading edge type encoding is to optimize savings and data and quality and all those kind of things. So they thought the job was done when that was deployed at some considerable cost. We overlaid our Smart Play tool over the top of that. We saved them another 42% on average of data. Reduced rebuffering significantly. So yeah, it's a great little case study, actually, worth having a look on the Media Melon website.
Okay, good deal. Mark, what are your plans in the next month besides staying home with the kids?
That's about it. No, we've got a bunch of remote events coming up that we're doing through our facility in the Bay Area, and we're still in the process of trying to figure out solutions for some of the other events that don't lend themselves quite so readily to virtualization. So we got a lot of work ahead. I'm working harder than ever right now, and I'm just happy to happy to have something to do.
Nice.
other than change diapers.
Well, besides wandering in the woods with my pants on to find survey stakes for a farm that I'm actually trying to get started, don't don't laugh, dog. Eric's already calling me Farmer Tim because of the fact that by the time we hit the next SMAF, I'll be should have 80 acres and start figuring out where the cows go and all that kind of thing. I'm actually wrapping up a professional services survey for Wowza that the report should come out on sometime here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So, Dom, what about you?
Brilliant. I'm sort of continuing with the madness that's the Thursday night show. I'm DJing later. If anyone's interested, the ThursdayNightShow.com. And in fact, I might open a beer in a few seconds just to get myself warmed up for that. Doing responsible things like that in the evenings, but irresponsible things like work in the days. We're continuing to roll out our big low latency CDN platform, which should start become something that I can talk about a little bit more fully, a little bit. Maybe not the next SMAF, but hopefully by the time we get to July or August, I should be able to start talking about what we've been doing there. So I won't have to look so clandestine, like I spend all my time messing about with streaming technology instead of doing some work for a living. I think with that, since everyone's gone funny backgrounds, I'm going to give you my funny background, which I'll have on for my DJing show later on. And really, there isn't much more to say apart from Mark. I didn't get to have a fight with you about AWS Elemental Link, but we will pull the boxing gloves off next month and go crazy with that one. And as you can see from my logo, don't forget, tune in to the Content Delivery Summit there on the 1st of June. And I think with that, I just have to say thank you to our guests and to my co-hosts and to those in the chat room who've joined us and thrown some very funny comments into the chat room this time, which is good. It's good to see the chat room coming to life. The podcast will be out later on tonight, and the video on demand will be available on the website very soon. With that, I think I've got to press the magic buttons and say good night.
Thank you so much.